Welcome back, dear listeners, to all things news, current affairs, and absolutely everything in between. I'm Georgie Tunny.
And I'm James Law.
And this is Flash Drive. J-Law, what a week.
I know. Geez, the Prime Minister can't take a trick, can he?
I want to know who is putting their hand up to be a Prime Minister, right? I mean, outside the obvious two men that we know, those two choices right now, who are doing this willingly. I mean, is regular Australians, is there anyone that's like, you know what seems like a great job? The Prime Minister.
Not for me, thanks.
No, I like talking to you here on Flash Drive, J-Law. That is the highlight of my week.
It's a safe space.
It really is. And look, coming up, we're going to be delving into the factional wars that have been going on throughout this unofficial election campaign. And some of you may be asking the big questions like, what is a faction? So J-Law and I are going to try and delve into that and bring some explanation to that, because it is really, really confusing, but also really important at the moment. Plus, the atrocities in Ukraine have continued with global condemnation for Russia after alleged war crimes. We'll be bringing you up to date with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's speech at the United Nations.
After what the world saw in Bucha, sanctions against Russia must be commensurate with the gravity of the occupiers' war crimes.
But first, J-Law, can you hear that? I mean, you've got to listen really, really carefully, but to me it sounds like a scream of frustration from the coalition power brokers who are trying desperately to call a federal election, but the news agenda is just not letting them.
But let's look at the range of people who've questioned your character. Senator Fierravanti-Wells, Catherine Cusack, Barnaby Joyce in a text message where he called you a hypocrite and liar. Jackie Lambie, Pauline Hanson both say they felt bullied by you. Julia Banks, Emmanuel Macron said that you lied to him. There was a leaked text from Gladys Berejiklian calling you a horrible, horrible person. That's a lot of smoke.
Which she denies.
That's a lot of smoke. No fire.
We've spoken at length now on this very podcast, J-Law, about everything that has been happening with the Prime Minister over the last few weeks, the opposition over the last few weeks. Last episode, we talked about New South Wales Liberal Senator Concetta Fierravanti-Wells. More bullying allegations have been directed towards the PM now, as well as allegations of racial vilification. Have we seen this before, so close to a federal election, where the PM seems to be getting taken down by members inside his own party?
Look, it's pretty unusual, and especially this close to an election, it seems like, that the wheels are really falling off. The only thing that I can think that is similar in recent memory was, remember when it was a couple of months out from the 2010 election, Laurie Oakes got up at the press club and had that zinger of a question for Julia Gillard. Clearly, I think in hindsight we can tell that Kevin Rudd might have been whispering in Laurie Oakes' ear about the moment that she took the Prime Minister from Kevin Rudd. And that really helped to derail her campaign. But that dominated news for weeks, but it does not seem at all as nasty as what we're hearing now from the Liberal Party. And, at the time of recording, the election hasn't been called, but it's going to be called any minute now. So it really means that the Prime Minister is starting on the defensive, on the back foot.
Which I think is problematic, right? Because it just means that though some of the coalition's biggest platforms, the budget, trying to entice voters with different cash splashes within it, though some of those have registered as wins towards them. If we look at the recent news polls, voters have widely accepted the budget and they like it, so they're seeing that as a good thing. The Prime Minister hasn't really been able to double down on any of that success because, as you say, J-Law, he's just defence at the moment because of these new accusations. The most recent ones, I guess, we're looking at what Michael Toke has said, also what Catherine Cusack has said, and, of course, Concetta Fierravanti-Wells, what she said under parliamentary privilege last week. But is this a case, or can we make a case for this just being sour grapes? Could it just be personal grievances, which is what the Prime Minister and lots of other senior coalition members are saying?
Look, I think that's probably where it starts, with personal grievances. Concetta Fierravanti-Wells lost her seat, so she didn't lose it. She was put in an unwinnable position on the Senate ticket. So that's when she started to run her mouth at the Prime Minister, not before. And similarly with Michael Toke, he lost out. He didn't get the political career that he felt was deserved to him. So I think that a lot of it does start with personal grievance. However, the other thing that's come back to haunt the Prime Minister is those texts from Gladys Berejiklian. So, during his appearance with 7:30 on Tuesday night, he was asked about Gladys's comments, and he said that Gladys had denied ever making them, and then bing, bam, boom, out come the literal screenshots of the texts with Gladys's name, showing that really she did send them. Gladys doesn't really have that kind of an axe to grind. Those texts came out before she had lost the premiership, if I'm not incorrect there. Mm-hmm. And that was just her venting real frustration about what she felt was a white-anting campaign by the Prime Minister's office against her during the height of, things like the bushfires and COVID. So, she didn't really have an axe to grind. So when you look at some of them, you'd be like, oh, yeah, this is personal grievances. But Gladys didn't really have any reason to feel that way towards the PM, except that, she felt attacked by him.
Well, then this brings me to my next question, Jayla, and I want us to go into this and look at this maybe slightly more broadly before we narrow down our focus. But Tuesday night on 7:30 with Lee Sales, the Prime Minister made a point to say that, you don't go into politics, you don't go into being the national leader if you are wanting to make friends. Here's some of what he had to say.
Of course.
And as a Prime Minister, you can't just say yes to everybody and give everybody what they want. And when they don't get what they want, like a $90 billion submarine contract, then of course they're going to lash out.
But they are going to lash out. I have to say I did find the Prime Minister quite defensive during that interview, J-Law. But what I want to talk about is, does he have a point? Does it matter if the Prime Minister of Australia is, quote unquote, a horrible, horrible person? Or, do we put too much weight in him being a nice guy when really do either of those things contribute to him leading well on a geopolitical stage?
Mm. I don't think being nice is that important. I think people care more about what a politician gets done. Mm. That's the main game. But the criticism about the Prime Minister goes beyond simply him saying no to people. It goes much more towards, saying no to a politician's request does not amount to bullying. I think people can see the difference where the persistent criticism is that he's a bully, which goes much further. So, and the other thing about it is, I don't know if people care if he's horrible, but they do care about whether politicians are authentic and whether they're truthful. And that's the other consistent criticism of the Prime Minister from his own side, that he lies. And, he does have a way of, I think he's so used to spinning that he can get caught in lies. I'm thinking about how he said he didn't invite Brian Houston from Hillsong Church to the White House. He did. I'm thinking about what he said about Gladys denied those texts. She never denied them. Lots of little things like that where, he's always defending himself and spinning things, and that, he gets caught in little lies. He would argue that that's all like kind of journalists being semantic and kind of, playing word games, he likes to say, but I disagree. What do you think?
I think I also have to disagree because you're right, J-Law. It's the focus on if he gets caught in a lie which makes it problematic, because also then that by default sort of legitimizes previous criticism towards him from people like the Deputy PM, Barnaby Joyce, who called him a hypocrite and a liar. Now, he has apologised for those comments and said that now working one-on-one with the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, that their relationship is completely different. However, the thought that of him still being able to form that text and put it in writing, I know that at the time Barnaby Joyce didn't think that it was going to be leaked because it was a private text message. But if you're putting that in writing, that the Prime Minister is a liar and a hypocrite. There is obviously some feeling behind that, and you obviously mean that because, I don't know, I don't put anything in writing, and I don't really think I go around calling people hypocrites and liars a whole bunch. So, yeah, I think that this has definitely become a big problem for the coalition, so close to the announcement, we think, of a federal election campaign, but also because is this then already a benefit, though, for the Labor Party? Like, no one's really talking about them, and I can't figure out right now if that's a good or bad thing for Anthony Albanese, because he kind of has this issue right now where the Liberal Party has set him up being like, no one knows who Anthony Albanese is. And now because the Prime Minister has taken all of the news agenda, all of the headlines in the last fortnight, yes, not for great reasons, but still no one is talking about Anthony Albanese, right?
Yeah. And, you know, there's been much less scrutiny on Albo's policy agenda, his budget reply. Jim Chalmers made a speech to the press club on Tuesday. A lot of that stuff, which really at this point of the election cycle we should be pulling apart and really digging into, it's all been crowded out by the much more salacious backstabbing happening in broad daylight from the Liberal Party. So, I mean, you know, at some point the voters will start to really switch on. It'll probably be not till like a fortnight before voting time, but the voters will start to switch on and make some evaluations about Labor's policies and agenda. But, you know, the Liberal Party has no one to blame but itself. So, yeah, it's a strange state of affairs.
Let's narrow down on some of that backstabbing now, because the other huge issue, it seems, for the Prime Minister and also his under siege character right now has been the factional wars within the New South Wales Liberal Party. Just yesterday, Mr Morrison's picks, his captain's picks, were confirmed after a court of appeal, after an appeal in the court was dismissed. So, Jayla, I want to know, because I'm not sure if previously everyday public, everyday voters maybe would be caring so much about what was going on with the factions in recent history. So for everyone who's wondering, because I have got a lot of questions from our listeners and people who are consuming Flash who just want to know the basics. Number one, what is a faction?
Oh.
So we talk about these factional disagreements and wars going on, not only in the coalition, the Liberal Party and the Labor Party, but it's just something I think that people are kind of like, wait, what does that even mean though? What's going on? Isn't that just politics?
Well, yes, it's important for people to know that like the big parties, you know, Labor and Liberal, they're also like got little sub-parties within them.
Yeah.
That's what a faction is. And they tend to be organised around, you know, their political ideals. So for, you know, the Labor Party, there's the left and there's the right, and there's sort of, and there's also like factions that are more like derived from unions and things like that. On the Liberal side, they're often around like ideas. They might be people who are more interested in the economy, people who are more interested in, you know, social conservatism. That's sort of how they tend to get divided. So, and these are like the things that count when like a government is putting together a cabinet. Like you have to kind of ration out who gets what positions, and who's in, who's out often has a lot to do with factions. But Georgie, perhaps you could explain, like now this is spilled out into the pre-selection of candidates right up to the 11th hour of an election.
Yeah, and this is where it gets tricky, right? Because I think the New South Wales Liberal Party, it's fair to say, from an outsider, from an insider within the party, everyone will be saying that the situation right now is not ideal. It is not good for them. They have only, on the eve of calling a federal election, just sorted everything out and figured out who is going to be up to be elected. So the pre-selections have only just been confirmed, and it got to that stage because all this infighting was going on within the New South Wales Liberal Party, from my understanding, between these factions, that the Prime Minister has come in to get involved and just been like, everyone needs to calm down. I am choosing these people, and these people is what it is, regardless of what you're saying, because you haven't been able to figure it out by yourselves. Of course, that has made lots of people within the the New South Wales Liberal Party very unhappy. It's put a lot of people out because they think that the democratic process should be upheld, and that's how it is going. But is there an argument, J-Law, that the Prime Minister here, he had to step in because this needed to get done, and it wasn't happening?
Yeah, I think so. Like it was getting outrageous. He had to do something, and he won this round. So at the end of the day, this is a win for him. He got his preferred candidates in the seats that he wants. So it is a win for him, and it's a stamp of his authority on the party. But now he's got to explain it, and I thought it was interesting what was his explanation for it on 7:30.
Let's go back to first principles. Susan Lee, one of my finest cabinet ministers, one of our most successful women members of parliament, was under threat. She was under threat from factions within the Liberal Party, and I decided to stand up to it.
Yeah, but that's for the rank and file. It's a democratic party, supposedly.
No, I'm very serious about having great women in my ranks.
Yeah, what about the others? There's other seats as well.
Well, Fiona Martin was another.
Trent Zimmerman.
And Trent Zimmerman was someone,
But it's not... What's going on with the Liberal Party that the Prime Minister's dictating rather than the grassroots
the Prime Minister
of the party?
was standing up to things happening in the party to make sure that quality people who are doing a quality job in their seats should be able to go forward to the next election.
What did you make of that answer, Georgie?
Well, I think that my face resembled Lee Sales's a bit there throughout a lot of that interview, just because when you are, you know this, J-Law, as a journalist, when you are interviewing politicians, when you're interviewing the top politicians as well, sometimes it can be really frustrating because you just want a straight answer. Now, I think that Scott Morrison wanting to enter into the pre-selection drama because he wants to stand up for the women in his party seems to be an argument that really suits him right now. It's a way for him to be like, guys, I am just doing what everyone has told me to do. We know he's the ultimate campaigner. I think it was very successful spin for him because I can't actually refute that because he's talking about Susan Lee, the Environment Minister, and if her position was under speculation or scrutiny or it was looking unlikely that she wasn't going to be pre-selected and he desperately needed her for his cabinet, then okay, that's a cabinet pick I can probably live with given how poorly women have been treated maybe throughout Parliament if the alternative was not going to be a woman. And therein lies the issue, right? Because I think he does, as we've been talking about, get caught in these half lies where he's like, well, that's what I'm doing. That's why I'm doing it. And it's like, yes, but it's so easy for us to contradict you in that because of X, Y, and Z not being women who you've also put forward for pre-selection.
Yeah. And, they were his people, right? It was Alex Hawke, it was Trent Zimmerman, that they're his people. So to say that it was a gender thing is ridiculous and completely disingenuous. I saw that Conchetta Fierravanti-Wells responded to this. She said, Morrison is simply using the gender card to conflate captain's picks to trash democratic processes in New South Wales. So maybe she gets the final word.
Wow. She can have it. She's fired up. Yeah.
But look, to give the Liberal Party some credit, this is not this factional warfare is not at all restricted to their side of the politics.
It's not, is it?
Labor's often much worse on this front. And, quite famously, Labor has parachuted people into certain seats. This time around, Andrew Charlton, Christina Keneally have both been put into seats where they don't live and, to try to win them for Labor. So at the expense of the grassroots candidates who the local branch wanted. So Labor Party is just as bad on this front.
For better or worse, though, even though they are just as bad on this front, because the coalition has dominated the news agenda so much, right? No one's really talking even about that when it comes to the Labor Party, for better or worse, because I think it is interesting, and we will see when we do eventually go to the polls, because what the last 2 years has taught us of the pandemic is a platform is everything. So when you are in power and you are currently given that platform, for better or worse, voters can at least recognise you and become familiar with you. So when they are there presented with a ballot paper and it's a couple of names and you're like, oh, well, I don't know, but I've seen that person. I've seen that person a lot, and then you tick a box. That could be something. That could be something over the next 6 weeks.
No, it's a good point. Yeah.
Heading over to the other side of the world now and back to Ukraine. It's been 6 weeks since Russia invaded its neighbour. We've seen millions of people fleeing to neighbouring countries, constant shelling and bombing, but this week we've arguably seen the worst of it so far. The atrocities from the Ukrainian city of Bucha, allegedly at the hands of Russian troops and occupied soldiers, have received global condemnation. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed the UN last night.
Now the world can see what Russian military did in Bucha while keeping the city under their occupation. But the world has yet to see what they have done in other occupied cities and regions of our country. Geography must be different, but cruelty is the same, crimes are the same, and accountability must be inevitable.
J-Law, it's so difficult to see lots of these images, and we constantly do because we are producing them, for Flash, so that our viewers, our audience can see them and know what is happening, because it is so important to be informed. But it's been really tough this week, hasn't it, to see just what is going on?
Yeah, I mean, with this crisis, there's just been an avalanche of news, but this feels a little bit different, what's happened in Bucha. What happened was, this is a smaller town near the capital, and the Russians were essentially kind of driven out of it, but on the way out, they just slaughtered hundreds and hundreds of civilians. And in the days after they'd left, people saw it, and it's literally bodies lining streets,
hands tied behind their backs, mass graves.
Like people, there was one image that stuck with me of a man who was on a bicycle, and he's sort of like just there dead on the ground, still with his legs around the bicycle. So just like, the sort of cruelty and barbarism you don't tend to see in the modern age. And, Zelensky's been understandably, shaken by this, and is sort of talking about he doesn't see how there can be a diplomatic solution anymore. What did you make of what Zelensky's been saying?
I thought it was interesting because I think that he is, as we've talked about previously, he's very, very clever in how he engages the world media. So Russia has denied any involvement in any of the atrocities that we've seen from Bucha. That is, we've seen no evidence to the contrary to support what they are claiming in terms of Ukraine maybe exaggerating things or staging things. Whatever we have seen has been truly awful. I think Zelensky has been a mastermind in being able to keep this in the global news agenda, and also in talking to and keeping international governments engaged. We saw him recently, last week, address the Australian Parliament, speaking to the UN Security Council. I think he had very strong comments to say how he was personally affected by everything that he had seen most recently. Given everything that he's seen over the last 6 weeks, I think that in itself is a statement. But also how he tackled the UN and really challenged them on what on earth they were doing and what was the point of them, I think is a call that lots of people around the world have been asking over the last 6 weeks too. This was a little bit of Zelensky absolutely blasting the UN.
If you don't know how to make this decision, then you can do two things. Remove Russia as an aggressor and a source of war from blocking decisions about its own aggression, its own war, and then do everything possible to establish peace. Or show how you can reformat and really work for peace. Or if your current format has no alternative and there is simply no way out, then just dissolve yourself altogether.
And it raises that question, Jayla, of the United Nations is seen as this pinnacle world body, a powerful body that people, that has sway, that people should follow, people should want to be a part of. But then I think that this war in Ukraine, while I don't think it necessarily changes that, I think it questions it. And I'm not sure which is more detrimental to the United Nations.
Yeah, it was pretty powerful speech. And he's angry.
Yeah.
He's furious, and he needs the support of all the nations. And the international response has been strong, but there's always more to do. And the fact that, Russia's sitting on that Security Council spouting its propaganda, I can understand why he's fired up about it. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to just continue to be engaged with this story as it goes on.
J-Law, it's our listeners' favourite part of the show. I don't mind it either, to be honest. We are going to be talking about what we can be looking forward to consuming on the platform Flash, that is the platform for which we both work, this week. And it seems to be, I think, what I know that you're going to suggest here, I think I know what you're going to suggest here, is really content that is very, very pertinent to the here and now at the moment here in Australia.
Yeah, Sky News Australia has had a really interesting documentary called The Campaign Uncovered, hosted by Peter Credlin. And it's all about getting inside what happens in federal election campaigns. So she was Tony Abbott's chief of staff and is now a really important commentator on the political process and still very well connected in political circles. So she knows this stuff, and she's kind of really looking into the way that data is now really important with the way elections are held, and also looking at the rise of independents this election, and how are they funded, and important questions like that. So yeah, it's a really interesting documentary, and you can watch it on demand now on Flash. But I know that ahead of the airing of the documentary, you had a chat with Peter. It was really interesting. What sort of insights did she have to say about Albo and ScoMo ahead of the election?
Most interesting thing that I found from Peter, because she is this ultimate insider, she is so well connected. She's been there, done that in a sense. Like, she's lived through all of the backstabbing, the politics, the everything that we've been talking about just on this episode. And so what I found it so interesting chatting to her was where she found both unofficial election campaigns for Albo and ScoMo right now. And really, she had a lot of praise for the Labor Party in how they had been framing Scott Morrison before all of, Scott Morrison's own party, essentially elements of it, different factions, turned against him in the last week or so. So that I found very, very interesting. And also in our chat, I asked her, because all of this effort, right, is put into federal election campaigns. Whatever side you're on, there is so much effort that goes into it, so much strategy, so much time, so much money. And I asked her if voters actually cared. Like, does it make a difference? And how do you re-engage a disenfranchised audience? Because I find that lots of voters, everyone who I talk to on the street or comes up to me and asks me like, oh God, can you believe politicians these days? They're all as bad as each other. Like, how do you actually cut through all of that to target and have results at the election time that you want to see? So that chat that I had with Peter Credlin ahead of the Sky News documentary is on the platform and separate to the doco. So watch the doco and then have a look at our chat with Peter Credlin, because we got into some really, really nice and meaty issues actually.
Yeah, no, it was a good chat. Yeah, so that's The Campaign Uncovered. You can watch it on Flash.
All right, we will be back next week. J-Law, what a great episode from us. Episode number 9, can I just say. We're reaching a big milestone next week.
Well, hang on, will we be back next week?
Oh, yeah, sorry, it's Easter. We're having a break, listeners. We're having a break. Having a little Easter break, guys. But when we come back, we come back, big anniversary for us, episode 10. And we think that we will have an election campaign on the way. We will.
We'll be in it. We'll be in it by then, don't you worry. And we will have some thoughts.
All the thoughts.
And
that's what we can promise. Yeah. Whether you want them to be shared or not, guys, you're going to be consuming it. So once again, thank you so much for listening in. J-Law, see you in a couple of weeks. And remember, here at Flash and Flash Drive, it's all about the news you need, how you want, when you want.
Catch you guys.